Imagine a place hidden under kilometers of ice, where men lived and worked in a secret underground city, isolated from the outside world, in the midst of Greenland's white, silent vastness. This place existed, and his name was Camp Century. During the height of the Cold War, at a time when the world lived under the constant threat of nuclear conflict between the two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, the U.S. government sought creative and discreet ways to ensure military advantage. In the midst of this tension, the ultra-secret project emerged known as Iceworm. The goal was as ambitious as risky, creating a vast underground network of military bases, interconnected by tunnels under the thick and seemingly impenetrable ice of Greenland. These bases would serve to position medium-range nuclear missiles, sufficiently close to the Soviet Union, but completely invisible to the enemy's eyes. The remote location and natural protection provided by ice would transform Greenland into a true strategic board, beyond the reach of conventional detections of the time. To put this plan into practice, the United States needed a prototype. Thus was born Camp Century, an experimental military base built between 1959 and 1960, under the pretext of being a scientific installation for ice, climate, and polar geology studies. Officially, the world knew Camp Century as an innovative project of science, but in fact, it hid much more complex and potentially destructive intentions. Construction was a real engineering challenge. It was necessary to excavate wide and deep tunnels on the ice, which could resist the colossal weight of the glacial layer, which in some points had more than 1 kilometer thick. Americans used equipment known as Peter Plow, a kind of milling mill that cut and removed large blocks of ice, allowing to open underground passages with impressive efficiency. In all, Camp Century was formed by 21 interconnected tunnels, which totaled almost 4 kilometers long. These tunnels were much more than cold runners. They formed a true self-sufficient city, equipped with bedrooms, cafeterias, laboratories, storage areas, workshops, hospital, and even a gym. The life below needed to be functional and organized, as the outer environment was inhospitable and relentless. Surface temperatures could easily reach -50 degrees Celsius, with sharp winds that transformed any external displacement into a dangerous task. But inside Camp Century tunnels, soldiers and scientists found shelter, heat, and structure. To guarantee electricity and heating, a revolutionary element was installed: a portable nuclear reactor, the PM-2A. This small reactor, mounted especially to operate under extreme conditions, was transported to the base and became Camp Century's energy heart, feeding not only vital systems, but also communication and research equipment. Success in reactor installation and operation has demonstrated the U.S.'s ability to operate nuclear technology even in the most hostile environments on the planet. The base was an example of advanced engineering and a clear show that, even away from home, the American military presence could expand silently and efficiently. In addition to the impressive infrastructure, Camp Century had sophisticated water recycling and food storage systems, ensuring autonomy for long periods. Evacuation routes were also planned for emergencies, although few knew exactly what could go wrong there. While the United States followed with their tests and underground operations, the true purpose of the base remained in absolute confidentiality. For the world, Camp Century was still a center for scientific studies, focusing on glaciology and meteorology, reinforcing the image of a power concerned with research and the development of human knowledge. But the reality was quite different. Each meter excavated on ice represented not only a technical advance but one more step towards the militarization of the Arctic. Greenland, which geographically belongs to Denmark, turned silently into a strategic point in the global chess of the Cold War. And so, under tons of ice, protected from the international look and disguised under the flag of science, Camp Century began his operation, while the world was not knowing that one of the most bold and dangerous projects of the time was hidden there. Inside Camp Century, life followed a rigorous pace, marked by military discipline and the constant need to maintain underground structures. More than 200 men lived there during the height of operations, including military and scientists, dividing a tight space, isolated from the outside world and surrounded only by the relentless cold and the oppressive silence of Greenland. The daily life started early. The artificial lighting of the tunnels simulated cycles of day and night, trying to preserve the sanity of occupants who, for months, did not see the natural light of the sun. The cafeteria served 3 daily meals, prepared with canned and lyophilized foods, stored in carefully maintained deposits to ensure the survival of all during long periods without external supply. In laboratories, scientists conducted ostensibly research focused on studying the ice sheet, polar climate, and geology of the region. They collected deep ice samples, investigated the dynamics of the glaciers, and sought to understand the mysteries hidden millennia under the white cloak of Greenland. However, the true focus of these analyses was often diverted to ensure that the environment was safe and suitable for maintaining tunnels and, especially, to evaluate the viability of the Iceworm project. Keeping operational tunnels was a constant challenge. The ice, although it seemed solid and static, was in continuous motion, compressing and deforming the passages. Every day, maintenance teams needed to reinforce the structures, excavate again walls and ceilings that gave in to ice pressure, and monitor cracks that could compromise the entire base. The work was exhaustive and risky, but essential for the continuity of the project. In addition, there was the psychological factor. The isolation, monotony, and extreme conditions caused great stress in the occupants. Many suffered from insomnia, depression, and anxiety, aggravated by lack of contact with family members and the constant feeling of being in an environment that could collapse at any moment their heads. To soften this picture, those responsible for the base installed a small gym, a makeshift cinema, and organized social events, such as gaming nights or lectures, trying to keep their morale high. Even with all these efforts, the Iceworm project began to show its weaknesses. The continuous movement of the ice, initially underestimated by the engineers, revealed a relentless and unpredictable force. The tunnels suffered constant deformations, forcing incessant repairs and raising maintenance costs to unsustainable levels. The base, which should be a model for the future installation of hundreds of nuclear missiles, was in practice an unstable and dangerous space. In addition to structural difficulties, there was also the geopolitical aspect. Greenland, although under Danish administration, was considered by the United States as a strategic area of national security. The American military presence in the territory, legitimized by a 1951 agreement with Denmark, was beginning to generate discomfort, especially as the true intentions of the project were kept confidential even of nearby allies. Meanwhile, the world was still oblivious to what was going on under the Arctic ice. For public opinion, Camp Century was still a milestone in polar science, an example of international cooperation and technological advancement. Few could imagine that this base hid one of the boldest military projects of the Cold War, whose success could have dramatically altered the balance of global power. However, the technical failures and the very high cost of maintenance began to erode the initial enthusiasm. Internal reports warned of the increasing risk of collapse of parts of the tunnels and the economic unfeasibility of expanding the model to a base network, as initially planned. In the midst of this scenario, those responsible for the project were forced to reassess the next steps. The dream of transforming Greenland into a hidden launching field of nuclear missiles began to crumble, buried under the same layer of ice that should protect it. However, the end of Camp Century would not be immediate. There were still years of operations, adjustments, and attempts to make the project viable. The nuclear reactor, for example, was still working and being monitored while scientific research, both real and facade, were still being performed. The soldiers and scientists who lived there became silent witnesses of an experiment that mixed bravery, cutting-edge technology, and incalculable risks. The base, which had begun as a symbol of technological supremacy, was becoming suspicious and, gradually, as a monumental calculation error. Gradually, it was clear that the American dream buried under the ice of Greenland might never be totally unearthed. Despite continuous efforts to maintain the functional base in 1967, the project was officially closed. The finding was inevitable. Ice, with its slow but constant movements, made it impossible to ensure the structural stability of the base in the long run. The tunnels had increasingly imminent risks of collapse, and the costs to maintain or expand the operation had already exceeded any initial forecast. The portable nuclear reactor, one of the most innovative elements of the project, was carefully dismantled and removed from Greenland. However, nuclear waste and contaminated materials remained buried at the scene, sealed under layers of ice and snow, a toxic legacy that would later rekindle environmental concerns about global warming and melting of the jelly. Camp Century's abandonment also marked the end of the ambitious Iceworm project, which aimed to create an underground network of military tunnels extending for thousands of kilometers under the Arctic, where they would be installed nuclear missiles ready to be launched against the Soviet Union. The geological, economic, and political unfeasibility of the plan eventually turned this dream into one of the many secret initiatives that defined the paranoia and rivalry of the Cold War. For years, Camp Century's true purpose has remained hidden from public opinion. Officially, the base was cited as an advanced center for scientific research, dedicated to the study of ice layers and polar climate. The image of heroic scientists facing extreme temperatures in the name of knowledge was carefully cultivated, while the military and nuclear aspects of the project were kept under strict confidentiality. Only almost 30 years later, in the 1990s, confidential documents of the Pentagon were disqualified, revealing to the world the real goals and risks associated with the base. The revelation caused surprise and outrage, especially between environmentalists and Danish authorities, who had never been fully informed about the scope of the project or the nuclear waste left behind. The American military presence in Greenland has always been a sensitive theme. Although a 1951 bilateral agreement between the United States and Denmark allowed the installation of U.S. military bases on the island, the existence of a secret nuclear base as Camp Century, with clearly offensive intentions, exceeded the spirit of that agreement and generated latent diplomatic tensions. This episode also contributed to a broader debate on Greenland's sovereignty, which has surfaced in recent years. In 2019, the then President of the United States, Donald Trump, caused international controversy by officially proposing the purchase of Greenland from Denmark on the grounds of strategic and economic interests. The proposal, initially treated as a joke, was later confirmed as genuine by the U.S. government and rekindled discussions about the island's geopolitical importance. During Trump's second term, there was again demonstrations of interest to the United States by Greenland, this time focusing on access to natural resources, emerging trade routes with the melting of ice and, of course, in maintaining a strategic military presence in the Arctic. Camp Century's memory in this context has emerged as a symbol of the ancient and persistent American ambitions in the region. Today, Camp Century remains buried, silent, and invisible under tons of ice and snow, but its history remains alive as a dark reminder of the hidden Cold War strategies and the lasting consequences of decisions made in the name of national security. The legacy of the base transcends the military sphere. In times of global warming, scientists warn that the progressive melting of the polar cap may one day expose again the rubble and toxic residues of Camp Century, transforming that forgotten place into a potential environmental threat. Recent studies have already identified that contaminated material remains intact, but its stability depends on the permanence of ice that isolates it, a fragile balance threatened by climate change. Camp Century, therefore, is not just a relic of the past. It is also a warning to the future, a clear example of how human actions, motivated by military or strategic interests, can have consequences that extend for generations. At the same time, the base represents an impressive milestone in the human engineering and ability to face extreme conditions in the name of grandiose goals. Even though these goals are not always fully revealed or understood by those who were not directly involved behind the scenes of power. In the end, Camp Century remains a frozen capsule in time, buried under the white immensity of Greenland, but with its history, secrets, and less and more visible lessons for the world that, decades later, finally learned of its existence and its true purpose.